Please welcome, from Wired Magazine and the Aspen Institute, panel moderator Garrett Graff.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Garrett, how you doing? Good to see you, Paul. Oh.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at RSA today. I'm Garrett Graff. I'm the contributing editor at Wired Magazine, where I cover national security, and the director of the cyber initiative at the Aspen Institute. And I am incredibly excited to be moderating this panel today, which is the first time that the four horsemen of cyber have ever appeared in public together. We will talk a little bit more about where that term came from and why that matters. But I'm especially also grateful today for Paul Nakasone, who has come out of retirement from his recent small gig at Fort Meade to make this his effectively first public appearance, reuniting this group today. So this is a group that probably needs very little introduction to a room like this, but I will do so anyway. We have Paul Nakasone, the recently retired director of the National Security Agency and General Commander of U.S. Cyber Command. We have T.J. White, three-star retired Vice Admiral Commander of the 10th Fleet. S.L. Davis, three-star Air Force General and current Inspector General of the Air Force. And then Jen Easterly, who in what the government calls the Plum Book, which is its listing of government jobs, is the equivalent of a four-star general as the director of CISA. And is the only one of us who was able to pull off a dress with horses on it today.
We all tried, but it didn't work.
That's my contribution to this panel.
But of course, none of the current roles of these people is the reason that we have brought them back together today. So I am excited to spend the next 50 minutes of our conversation here diving back into some of the early history of cybersecurity and to talk about these four people and their role helping to found U.S. Cyber Command and, of course, the illustrious careers that they have gone on to since. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you today and ask you to take us back to 2008. And a flash drive in Afghanistan, and where our story starts with Buckshot Yankee.
I think it's an important story, right? It's 2008, and the Department of Defense realizes that there is malware on both their unclassified and classified networks. These are the warfighting networks that we're using for U.S. Central Command. And to really summarize it, there are really three very, very important things that comes from this discovery. First of all is the jarring impact it has in the department. Not necessarily for the unclassified networks, but truly our classified networks have been penetrated. The second piece, I would say, is that during this event, really the National Security Agency is able to both detect and mitigate. So the ideas that Keith Alexander starts to have in terms of where do we need to go as a Department of Defense with cyber forces starts to take place. And then the third element is, I think the third element is that this is really the reason for U.S. Cyber Command. Everything starts to accelerate after the mitigation is done, and we start talking about what do we do about this going forward.
And to spend one more minute on this, talk a little bit about sort of just what a crisis moment this was for DoD as they sort of discovered what was happening and the effort that the government launched and the military launched and the NSA launched to try to rid hackers from the Pentagon networks.
Well, let me start, and I know that TJ and SL and Jen will not be bashful to jump in, but here's what it was like. It was like VTCs every single day. It was trying to understand the scope of the problem. It was You know, very, very senior people asking very, very basic questions like, well, how many computers are impacted? Or where did it come from? Or what do we do about it?
Well, it was also, how many computers do we actually have? And we could not answer the question of how many computers were on the SIPRNet. So there were those basic questions, and I think there was a realization that we didn't really understand the system as well as we should.
I think commanders, this was a no-shitter. And everyone wakes up relying on this network. 4 stars, senior civilians, commanders rely on these networks to do every bit of all the business and the mission. And to think that this is something they perhaps have not thought as much about is potentially compromised. When you talk about a DoD, which is global 24/7, 365 everywhere, that's unsettling in the minimum.
And Jen, when we sort of think back to the original events that sort of brought together the circumstances under which U.S. Cyber Command first was conceived, the other sort of major change in the way that the U.S. government operated, the way that the military operated in the digital space happened in Iraq. And that was where you sort of cut your teeth in those early 2000s. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the military learned in Iraq about warfighting.
Yeah, so it was, folks will remember the period of violence in 06, 07, where insurgents, part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, were using the improvised explosive devices and explosively formed penetrators to have catastrophic impacts on our troops on the ground and Iraqi civilians. And the head of NSA, who was our boss that put together the I-Team, Keith Alexander, was classmates with Dave Petraeus, who was head of Multinational Forces Iraq. And as I recall, he really wanted to take NSA from behind the green door and make us relevant to the warfighter. And so we started deploying a lot of NSA officers, whether it was military or civilian, into the field to support the brigade combat teams with cryptologic support teams. And this is what Paul was doing. He was training those teams and deploying them out. The other thing that we were asked to work on was to stand up this capability. It was called RT10 at the time, later RTRG, Real-Time Regional Gateway. It was super classified at the time, but has since been declassified. And what it was supposed to do was to take all of the communications in theater that insurgents were using in particular to plan and operationalize these attacks, whether that's satellite or cell phone or reporting from troops on the ground, and integrate them and enrich them and correlate them so we could illuminate terrorist networks not in days or weeks, but in hours and minutes. And it was one of those projects in the middle of a war zone that took an incredible degree of entrepreneurialism and innovation and teamwork and collaboration. It was something that was really, really hard, but it sparked a lot of energy around how do we actually support the troops on the ground. We were able to get the system up and running, and ultimately it helped the troops on the ground and the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, to be able to take in thousands of insurgents off the battlefield. And one of the positive things about that, certainly it saved lives, and that to me was like an incredible lesson learned, but it also brought home the lessons to a combatant commander, to General Petraeus at the time, how important cyber and communications was becoming. If you read his testimony to the Congress in September of 2007, he specifically talks about the takedown of the ISI, Islamic State in Iraq, media cells. He talks about cyber as a strategic instrument, and part of what we worked on was getting a lot of support from the combatant commanders for the stand-up of yet another, a sub-unified command, and I think it was really, really helpful to have support early on at that level as we began to figure out how to set up this brand new command.
Yeah, and I think Jen had a really important point there, right? So we see the speed, right? But we also see the importance of data. You remember, Stan McChrystal having a discussion with, Keith Alexander and Dave Petraeus about who controls the data. Well, why don't we put the data all right here and you can have the information from the data. But the big piece is it all changes when you send high quality people. Jen was a leader of our folks in Baghdad, and we were all ensured that we could focus on what would need to be done. So.
And you were at the time the head of what was called the Meade Operations Center. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and talk about the way that, you know, go back these 15 years in history, and NSA is a civilian intelligence agency that part of the Pentagon, part of the Department of Defense, but had this sort of military component to it, supporting the warfighter, a big part of what Meade Operations Center was doing.
Yeah, I think, you know, the beauty of the National Security Agency is 40% of its workforce is military, and I happen to be leading an element of that force, and the focus really was, we have new tools, we have new tradecraft, let's make sure our talent comes together with that tradecraft. And this was, I mean, this was non-standard. It wasn't in doctrine, and I don't think General Alexander was ever pulsed by doing something outside of doctrine. But that was the beauty of it. This is what we learned in terms of bringing operators and developers together, and they say, hey, this is how we utilize this tool better.
And TJ, out of these experiences within NSA that General Alexander has, Buckshot Yankee, the warfighting in Iraq, comes a brainstorm, and
Or a curse.
or a curse, and you get the call for a brief 2-week assignment.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the in brief. Yeah, so 2008 operations with then JFCCNW, underpinned by the MOC, underpinned by Army Network 4 Battalion, doing operations forward, compromised classified networks, innumerable VTCs, count denominators. Take an organization called JFCCNW Network Warfare, subordinate to U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha, JTF-GNO, Global Network Operations, subordinate to U.S. STRATCOM in Omaha. Take the expertise and the talent and depth of the National Security Agency and their global aperture and platform, become a small team, go to General Alexander's office on the 8th floor, honest, 2 weeks. We're gonna figure it out, we'll go to Omaha, we'll do a quick spin, and then we'll see where it goes. 15 months later is the establishment ceremony for U.S. Cyber Command. Part of the things, General Alexander had the vision. The support from U.S. Strategic Command, though, the combatant command responsible for this domain at the time, a lot of mass and experience and perspective. You know, this idea of cyber is no longer the province of intelligence. We need to capitalize on the agency, NSA, as a combat support agency, also as part of the intelligence community, and make this a credible Title X mission for the DoD and the nation.
And so how did the four of you come together?
You know what?
No.
Yeah. So Paul and I knew each other. You were like my branch rep many years ago.
Look how successful you are.
Yes, I owe it all to you. So we knew each other. I don't think we knew each other. I remember, though, I'm in my office at Fort Meade in Tailored Access Operations, and I get this phone call like from a super aggressive captain, and I thought it was an Army captain, and it was like, you need to get down here. This is Captain White. You need to get over to this building and meet with us. It's probably not so aggressive.
I don't remember that, but.
Who the hell is this Captain White guy? Because he has a very commanding voice. Just listen to him. And
Very commanding.
And you, Jen, I think were a lieutenant colonel at
I was
the
a
time.
junior person. I was a lieutenant colonel. I was
Yeah.
a colonel, captain, colonel.
And
That's why I had to
lieutenant
do all the
colonels
hard
in the
work.
Army are not used to taking very direct orders from
Well,
aggressive
from a
Army
young
captains.
captain, so it's
Yes.
like super aggressive. Okay, I'll go.
Joint force,
I'll
joint
bite.
force.
I'll bite, right?
Yeah.
Turned out
Yeah,
to
and so it was a meeting, and I mean, my recollection, and there are some in the audience, I see some familiar, largely friendly faces. You know, General Alexander rolled with that. It was a small group in his office, and it was a conversation. Then it became an opportunity to think about a vision. And then it was a discussion about, well, what do you think? And it was an invitation to see the future. And it was an opportunity where he asked deliberately, what do you think? Do we have anything wrong here? Are the assumptions valid and accurate? How do we be part of the team? And then it was, and now we got to get STRATCOM involved.
Well, just to go back a little bit, so Secretary Gates, I think, seeing what was happening in Iraq, actually saw this cyber issue, I think, pretty clearly. And there was, that, you know, predating Buckshot Yankee, there was an effort to do some planning on what would it look like to reorganize for cyber. And I think there was a planning team at Stratcom, there was a planning team out at Fort Meade. We shared information, so that was like step one. Then Buckshot Yankee hits, and that shows the nature of the problem, the scope of the problem, and we have to do something. And out of that came an order to put JTF GNO, the Global Network Ops and Defense, with network warfare, the offense, together, and that was like step one. So the first task was just really combine these two existing organizations. That would grow over time and become a much larger task that would become building US Cybercom.
And as you began to think about this, take us through those early conversations, take us through how you developed the vision and the understanding of sort of what this should be and what it needed to be.
Well, I think most of us in the audience would say, well, I mean, why would you have to have like a lot of education? You're just talking about cyber, but remember what 2008 was like. I mean, I remember seeing a lot of superiors and high-ranking folks that would never read their email. In fact, they'd get it printed and then read it. And you had to begin with just level setting on the education in terms of what is this all about. And I think that, I think General Alexander knew that early on, but it was kind of feeding us about how do we educate a broad range of customers and policymakers on what this is all about.
And just to be clear, like the I team, right, the implementation team, that was General Alexander's term for us. I guess we were implementing Cybercom, but it was, Joint Forces,
Joint Functional Component Command.
Joint Function Network
That
Warfare, so the Navy guy, the Army guy in charge of the Meade Operations Center, the Lieutenant Colonel in charge of the Army Network Warfare Battalion, and then SL coming from Stratcom, who was supposed to be the spy, the mole,
Babysitter, I think, is a better word.
yeah, okay, babysitter to prevent us from doing anything that Stratcom didn't
Getting
want
too
us
crazy out there.
to
at Fort
do.
Meade.
And then,
Well, so I think part of it also was, look, the DoD is magnificent in many things, and there are some areas where it can always be improved. But one of the things it does very well is sort of the oath it takes to the Constitution: discipline, structure, transparency, focus, authorities, alignment. And in getting that fully attached and articulated and then moving was a lot of effort and necessary effort.
And talk to us a little bit about how you began to operationalize this vision and build the case for Cyber Command.
We started with a narrative, and we said, let's educate senior members of the Department of Defense and anyone else we had to on what's it take to operate in cyberspace. And I think that was the first thing, and we came up with what was functionally known as the cyber storyboard. And it was literally a story that we took, senior folks from the Department of Defense and other elements of our government through in terms of what we wanted to do.
Yeah, I think, so the DoD, write it down, 5-paragraph orders, explain the mission, then go do a thing. We had occasion in early stages to come to California, come to Hollywood, talk to the movie industry. How do you build a narrative? How do you tell a story? Well, you develop this thing called a storyboard. And so that's what we tried to do. And we had some incredible talent, not us, that turned that storyboard into something that was visual, and then it could be mapped to a narrative, and it was very, very dynamic. I think probably 100+ versions of that. The brief given over 100 times in probably a 9-month period. More miles on the 295 Beltway between Fort Meade and the Pentagon or the Capitol. And after the first 3 weeks, it's like everybody wanted the brief. And those briefs were flawless. No mishaps, no missteps, no interruptions, no, hey, who's got the key to the lock bag?
oh my God, are you going to go
Well,
there?
we got to go a little bit before this
All right,
because
we're
not
there
everybody
yet.
loved the brief.
Why don't we go to the Jim Miller briefing?
Yeah,
don't
not
need to do
everybody
that.
loved the brief.
That was
So
my
we-
failed moment.
So we have this brief that everybody wants, and we want to take it to Congress because Congress is one of the key people that have to approve what we're doing. And so we have to take it to OSD to show it to OSD, and we bring this brief in that everybody loves, and we give them the brief, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy did not love it as much as everyone else did, I would just say. So
I think the classic line was, he looks at DJ and he goes, I understand every word you're saying, but I have no idea what any of it means.
Welcome to cyberspace, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And this was after, it was funny, we had to, this is what, 15 years ago, we had to bring our little laptop with this briefing created by the secret sauce to the I-Team was this young woman graphic artist that we called the Groover. Her name was Catherine Groover, but we called her the Groover, and she was amazing. But we needed a screen. So all four of us were like carrying this like little portable screen with us everywhere, all over the Pentagon.
Laptop, no thumb drives,
No.
portable projector.
Portable screen that we had to put up in Jim's office, and then he didn't like the briefing.
And what were the early objections that you heard? What were the challenges that you feel like you had to overcome in telling this narrative and convincing policymakers?
Well, I think there were just it's always difficult for change, right? I mean, this is the culture change piece that's so hard in big organizations. There were naysayers in NSA. NSA felt as though Cybercom's going to eat us, and it's all going to be about Title X operations, and we won't do anything with regards to intelligence gathering. But there were others.
No, and everyone at Cybercom thought that NSA was going to eat up Cybercom and take over it. So there was distrust on both sides. And when you go to the combatant commands, they're of course worried that you're standing up a new combatant command with separate authorities, and how will that work? So a big part of our outreach was actually going to those combatant commands and talking about how cyber would support them as opposed to how cyber would be supported. And I think that was key. We did a series of tabletop exercises, one kind of internal to NSA, Stratcom, and the two components, where we identified some issues and worked through those. We did a set of tabletop exercises with the services and the combatant commands, and I think we originally had, like 30 people that were going to show up to that TTX, and we had like 3 times the amount of people show up, and
Tell that
protocol
story.
and
So as the
security.
former
Tell
director of
that
NSA,
story.
let me tell this story, because I think this is a good one. The interest in cyber was across the board. Everyone wanted to see what these folks were doing, and what are you creating? And so we thought we'd have a little gathering of 30 people, and suddenly there were 90 people in this room, and NSA protocols, overwhelmed, and someone then says, they just let these people in without checking their clearances. Well, you can imagine that was like, gasoline on the fire, and so it was a very, very interesting day, as I recall that brief.
What'd you do the next morning?
Well, TJ and I went to the protocol office and brought a lot of gift cards.
Starbucks gift cards. So very sorry.
But the one thing we should, one of the things that we were trying to get across was how important it was to build this new combatant command on the Cryptologic platform, which was something that was super different, and that led to the dual hat structure, right, where the director of NSA was also the commander of US Cybercom. So part of the cyber storyboard had to bring in all of these exquisite NSA capabilities that were so key to being successful in cyberspace, both defensively and offensively. And that's where we brought in some fantastic NSA people to brief on technical capabilities, to brief on computer network operations and hunting capabilities and defensive stuff. And I think that was kind of the secret sauce.
Yeah, I mean, clearly this was the piece that was different. We brought and said, hey, this is how we're going to hunt in the future, and this is how we're going to use data in the future, and this is how we're going to look at the way the intelligence community has done intelligence operations on that, and that's how we're going to do it in the future, perhaps, as we look at offensive operations. This was a key piece of it, and everyone was very interested in that because they had seen a bit of that, coming back to your point, in Iraq, right? And they had seen the impact that could happen.
Yeah, so Air Force has been flying planes a long time. Army's been driving tanks and shooting cannon for a long time, and troops in the field. Navy's been driving ships and boats for a long time. This was 1 year after the introduction of the iPhone.
Yep.
And no one really had a sense that this was global, and it was real time, and it was all the time, and it could have effects, not just information effects or infrastructure effects, but cognitive effects. And so when you try to talk to, conventional force commanders, when they're used to things at 25 knots at sea, 1,300 knot closure in the air, or supersonic movement, and then mass, when it's not touchable, it's ephemeral. This audience gets that. They live in this domain, and they know how hard it is to secure it and to operationalize it for their purposes. But when it comes to national security, it's a challenge. And so I mean, it's always just a pleasure to see some of this audience continue to bigger and better things in the domain. So it's.
But I think that was one of the keys of the cyber storyboard. I think when you ask everyone in DC if they understand cyber, they all nod their heads and say, yes, absolutely, I understand it. But literally telling it at the basic level, using cartoons, actually helped them to really understand it, and I think was one of the big keys to our success.
I'm sure no one in this room has ever had the experience of trying to explain cyber and having someone nod at them like they understood it. Yeah.
We had this one briefing that we did to outside advisors, and part of the briefing, it really broke it down. Like I think we took stuff from how computers work, but part of it was about packets and the TCP/IP protocol, and like out in the audience was Vint Cerf. It's like, oh great, we get to explain to Vint Cerf how the TCP/IP protocol works. So he was very gracious about it. It all worked out.
And then let's talk about how then you begin to actually move this towards the creation of Cyber Command. You've made your case, you've overcome Jim Miller's objections.
He became a big supporter ultimately.
What does this sort of begin to look like as it materializes into a real thing?
Well, there's a process, right? The department has a process upon which you are able to go through to, first of all, get an order, take that order and put it into some type of planning document. Then we had an implementation plan. And then we had, I think, hundreds of people comment on our plan after having read only a few pages of the 300-page document.
360 pages. I'm sure that I can count on a hand or two how many people actually read the whole plan.
And what was the quote?
So many non-concurs from so many people that didn't actually read the plan. But here's the thing: most of the non-concurs were really just that we hadn't quite explained it, I think, in enough depth. There weren't any, I would say, foundational kind of structural flaws. It was just people didn't understand what we were talking about, or they were worried about the authorities. So we were able to clarify that, and I think move past that. The other challenge was we were trying to get the plan signed by the SecDef, and his staff was completely afraid that he was signing off on every single item in all 360 pages. So he had to write like a little disclaimer in the front that, you know, just because it's approved by the SecDef doesn't mean that he's approved every individual item. And we were able to get plan approval and keep moving forward.
And how did the vision change? Like what surprised you as you were going through it in how you wanted to build this, what you wanted to build, what you were going to recommend?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we would say in the 12 or 15 months that we were doing it, that we knew a lot changed from day 1 to day 400. I think pretty quickly, though, after the stand-up ceremony, then this amazing thing begins to happen in the Department of Defense and the nation, expectation of outcomes. And then it's like, we need to mobilize, we need to build service componency. And I think the thing that made it entirely plausible and achievable was, frankly, the platform at Fort Meade. You know, the National Security Agency has done the lion's share of a lot of heavy lifting in securing and defending the nation for a long time. And yeah, a lot of it's classified work, but if you're in Congress and you're read in, if you're in the Pentagon, you're read in, if you're in the executive branch and you're read in, you see that every day, the commitment to that mission. You also have an organization called STRATCOM, which has been in arguably the biggest theater of avoidance and deterrence that you can possibly exist in, and they've been doing it miraculously well. So for those two together, you know, those commanders and directors to function effectively and collaboratively, I think was very, very important.
I think the other piece, though, that, I mean, even besides that, is just the atmosphere in which we worked and lived. So from that initial meeting, really it is 15 months that we'll work together almost every single day. I don't recall a lot of days off, maybe Christmas and New Year's, but for the most part every day. But the other thing was, you have 3 06s, 2 colonels, a captain, and a lieutenant colonel making a lot of decisions and given, you know, really broad guidance, and then allowing, you know, us to fail, and we failed a number of different times. But that was kind of the atmosphere that I remember working under, and it was really effective.
Well, that was given to us by General Alexander, and I think, you know, one of the things that I remember is we got real estate on the 8th floor of the headquarters, and I think we're between his office and the elevator, which he had to walk by every day. So most days, he would stop in the office in the afternoon, and we could bounce stuff off of him. It allowed us to go very fast. We got some instant feedback on things. We'd say, hey, we were thinking about this, what, you know, left or right, and he would say, this is the way we need to go. Sometimes he'd say, I need to think about that for a day or two, and then a day or two later we'd get the answer. But it allowed us to iterate very quickly and have direct access to the most senior leader who was really advocating for this. And we couldn't have done it as quickly as we did or as effectively as we did without that interaction.
Everything's eliminated from the 3-star at the time to us, for the most part. And, it's really interesting when, it's not only the fact that he's rapidly making decisions, but it's the signal he's sending to a very, very large organization that, hey, you guys are all going to get this brief because it's really important. Hey, we're going to bring these folks to meet all our external customers. Every single visitor that came in 2009, I think, received the cyber storyboard.
Yeah, and I think still at Fort Meade, some of the hitters that he identified to be part of the team, they're still hitting and playing for, on base every day. And that's amazing, right? So they kind of owned it from the beginning, and they've turned it 15 years later into something that works very well.
Well, the other thing was the talent pool. So you had this group before with direct access to General Alexander, but the team morphed over time. So as we solved a problem, we'd move on to the next, and we'd bring in the right people to solve that problem. I suspect some of them are sitting out here. As a matter of fact, I see at least 1 or 2 that were brought in at some point to advise on a specific issue, resolve that, and continue moving forward. So that was, I think, pretty remarkable. I'd not seen that done before and working a major problem.
And the other thing I'd say is I think we all, you all were 06s, I was in 05. I certainly learned a lot from being in that environment. I learned a lot about the importance of empowering people and crushing bureaucracy so you can actually make hard things really happen. I learned a lot about just the power of no drama, no ego, which frankly was, I think, our motto in terms of how we operated. And really, I think it informed how I lead organizations to this day.
Paul, I had the opportunity to profile you for Wired a couple of years ago, and even though you didn't speak to me for that article, I spoke to a lot of people around you. And one
It's interesting how you got that clause in there, Gary.
And one of the things that really struck me in going back and talking to people who were working with you at the time was you had sort of thought about this time that this was maybe the peak of your career, that this was, there was actually not much of a career path up into the general ranks for someone with a cyber background, with a network warfare background, and you were sort of unsure how much more you could rise in the Army at that time. It turned out your career worked out sort of okay. And in 2016, you become the commander of NSA and the commander of US Cyber Command, as it is, for the first time, unified combatant command. And I wonder if you could now reflect back about sort of what you think your team got right in setting it up now that you've sort of been in this job, and what lessons you learned as you were sort of actually trying to implement this as the person who had helped originally conceive of it.
So I took over NSA and Cyber Command on the 4th of May, 2018, and I think the first thing that I would say is, so the department got it right. This is 2008 and 2009. Think if we hadn't done something in that time frame to build a cyber force. All of the things that, that we're able to do over the next 10 plus years get done because we had the basis of what's going on. I think we got the structure pretty right. In fact, one of the things I think I said in the after action report was we were 100% that we got 17% of it correct. But we could iterate really fast. That's the important part. We iterated really quickly on things that we thought we got wrong. But I think to your point, there were also some things that we just didn't foresee. What didn't we foresee? The rise of the private sector. Oh my goodness. 2018, when I take over as director and commander, the private sector is the big change that has obviously happened and has happened, and we had to figure out how we're going to work with them.
Mm-hmm. So you build a command in 2009 to 2010. You bring it online. 2 years later, you establish a cyber mission force. 6 years later, you establish and publish a strategy called Persistent Engagement and Defend Forward. That enables a whole bunch of operations for a subordinate command to do globally, which the boss here can talk about more emphatically and deliberately. And the department is still learning, right? On the secure operate defense side, it's implementing some things to try to promote security of infrastructure, CMMC. It's good, but it's not perfect. Some would say it's moving too slow. So how can you partner with industry standards who've been around a long time, ISACA, CMMI, take advantage of that depth, take advantage of that breadth, take advantage of their agility to scale for the DoD and the defense industrial base. Those are the sorts of rise of the private sector I think that the DoD needs to do better of.
Jen, going back to that sort of 2008 window, DHS did not have a particularly great relationship with NSA at the time. Now that you are sitting on the other side of the civilian cybersecurity defense system, what's the relationship with NSA? Sort of what do you think you four horsemen got right and wrong about how the government should be approaching cyber?
Yeah. So to be clear, I mean, DHS was formed out of 9/11, so a real focus on counterterrorism, and I think at that period of time, we were evolving our cyber capabilities, but remember, we didn't even stand up CISA until 2018, when Paul was the third commander of US Cyber Command. And so there was a bit of, I think, tension between the senior leadership of the Department of Homeland Security and the National Security Agency about who was the right entity, organization, to defend the nation in cyber, and specifically to defend our critical infrastructure here at home. And by virtue of the fact that, you know, a lot of this, as I said, was built off the cryptologic platform that had incredible power and incredible understanding of cyber and cybersecurity. I mean, NSA is the place where you make codes and break codes. So incredible, exquisite capabilities. And I think there was a little bit of like, we can do this. As things have evolved, I actually think it has worked out very well to have a civilian cyber defense agency that is focused on the protection and defense of US critical infrastructure, but working hand in hand with the National Security Agency, specifically the Cyber Directorate and the Cyber National Mission Force and the Cyber Collaboration Center that focuses on the defense industrial base piece of this. I mean, I think, frankly, what I've tried to do since I came back from Morgan Stanley was really informed by the environment that we all operated in, which was get rid of the tribalism, whether it's the tribalism of different services or the tribalism of different departments and agencies, and just figure out how we can work together effectively to do a really hard mission for the nation. And I think we've done that effectively across the interagency, specifically NSA, CISA, FBI, US Cyber Command, in a way where, you know, the egos go out the door and you're really, really focused on what you can do to ensure the safety and security of the American people.
Yeah, I saw it first in 18. It was clearly, you know, Chris Krebs and Chris Wray and Paul Nakasone working together to figure out how we're going to have a safe and secure election. But then from, you know, Chris's tenure into Jen's tenure, you know, how do you really look at, you know, this is the agencies that are responsible for the defense of our nation, right? And it's not the National Security Agency, right? Our focus is outside the United States. But that comes with, you know, I think a lot of work on very senior leaders' part, and also some, I think, focus on the mission that we have to do.
So building on what Jen said, one of the things I think we got right is we focus on how do you integrate authorities across the department and across the government. And we're not very good at that. You know, the old military model is you have a supported commander and he's in the fight and he's got the authorities and other commanders are supporting him. The fact of the matter is, if you look at major adversaries, you actually have multiple commanders with authorities that are probably supported in their specific role. So how do you integrate those and share information so that you're maximizing those authorities? And that's something I think that we focus on a lot. I think the DoD has certainly gone there. And I think we envisioned like a collaboration center, a shared JOC with everybody in it. I don't think we ever quite got there, but I think the vision was the right vision.
We're going to open it up to questions here in a couple minutes. I think we've got 2 mics here if people want to start queuing, and I'll do another question or 2 here. So, Paul, you have retired recently. What do you think you're going to do with the rest of your life?
Maybe I'll answer the questions that you send me for future articles. I have accepted to be the founding director of Vanderbilt University's Institute for National Defense and Global Security, where we're going to bring together Vanderbilt's strength in being able to do interdisciplinary education, innovation, convening, and then also advising. So looking forward to build the premier national security institute in the nation.
Yay.
Let me, well, people maybe. I don't see anyone actually lining up for questions.
Garrett,
so-
can I ask
yeah.
Estelle to talk about the briefing we had to give to Congress?
Sure.
Which was really, this is not a trivial thing. We had to get the command approved by Congress. We had to get the approval for the 4th star. We had to get Senate confirmation. So one of our most important briefings was to the committees on the Hill. And we prepared, we brought the material down and classified packages, whatever
Before
it
you
was.
get before you get to that, I know where you're headed.
Okay.
Before you get to that, we'll get there.
I've been waiting for years to tell this story
But we
in
took
front
the
of
cyber
hundreds of
story
people.
board to Dr. Miller. He said, absolutely not, you can't take that to Congress. So we made this other briefing. We started giving this briefing with our OSD handlers there. And the staff was just shaking their head like, you're not answering our questions. And I don't know who it was, but we said, well, we have a briefing that answers all those questions, but we weren't giving you that briefing today. And they said, well, when can we get that briefing? And I think Jen said, well, as it turns out, we have it right here on the laptop. And so our OSD handlers conferred quietly, and they said, well, I guess you can give them that briefing. So we gave them that briefing, and it was consequential. I think the committee chairman said in General Alexander's confirmation hearing, hey, we've had some really productive conversations with your staff, and we have a good understanding of what you're doing, and that I kind of paved the way and made his confirmation easier. I won't say easy. But before we get there, so we showed up for the briefing. Of course, this was a highly classified briefing in a lock bag that
Oh, the
Jen
lock
had the
bag.
lock bag. Is that where you were going?
Because I was the junior person, yeah.
Right.
Lock bag.
So in the lock bag, but when it came time to give the brief, we couldn't find the key. I could not find the key to the lock bag. So
was the
Jen
most
went
stressful
and got a pair of scissors. And as it turns out, you can break into one of those lock bags.
It
with
is
a pair of
super hard
scissors.
to break into a canvas lock
With
bag
enough ferocity,
with scissors.
you can get into the.
Yes.
But I did find that, so we normally wore, utility uniforms, not blues like I had on today. So I did actually find the key. It was in my pocket. I just didn't find it when I got there, and I actually still have that key to this day. I've actually kept that key.
It's a talisman.
You should put that in the Cybercom Museum.
This might go, actually,
You should.
perhaps. Or eBay, I'm not sure which one. After I get
More
out.
of it out.
All right, we're going to switch to audience questions here. Friendly reminder from the moderator that questions end in a question mark.
Hi, I'm Gary Warner from UAB in Birmingham, Alabama. I bring greetings to General Nakasone from Ed Rao from Birmingham Southern. And as you're entering academia, I wonder if you have any advice for people like the professors. How would we best prepare our people to become your people? And Jen, that could go for you as well.
So I would just comment on my colleagues here. I'm not sure what they majored in their universities that they went to, but here's what I would tell you, that each of them are incredible critical thinkers. They can take a problem, define the problem, do the facts and assumptions, bring together ideas, test those ideas, and come to a feasible, acceptable, and sustainable solution. That's education that we need. And each of them, a high degree of emotional intelligence. And that really helped. I mean, that's how we work together. That's how we were able to, deal with stressful times and stressful people. And so I think those two keys were really critical, I think, for working together and having success.
Anything to add, Director Easterly?
Oh, I'm a big fan of the Rubik's Cube. And one of the reasons is, Erno Rubik, the Hungarian sculptor who invented the thing in 1974, he had this great quote. He said, if you are curious, you will find the puzzles around you. If you are determined, you will solve them. So I love the intellectual curiosity and the determination, and I look to that along with, as Paul said, critical thinking and emotional intelligence.
Thank you.
Question over here.
Hi, yeah, how are you? Thank you so much. My heart's pumping. My name is Mari Spina. I do cybersecurity at MITRE. I focus on cloud, and I'm concerned a little bit about the fact that so much of our workloads have moved to the cloud, and our visibility vantage point has sort of, all the data's gone underground. What would you say to the notion of a national cyber feed where the cloud service providers were to feed it to potentially a JOC, a Joint Operations Center? Would that be valuable?
Jen?
Well, I mean, the whole point of what we were trying to operationalize was how do you get the data together in a way that you can make sense of it, that you can analyze it, that you can make sure you can use it in an integrated, correlated, enriched way. That was the lessons I took from my time in Iraq. We tried to apply that as we build US Cyber Command. We were not talking about the cloud in the early days as we built the command, but certainly if we can bring together the data so that we can make sense of it and use it and protect it, sounds like a good idea to me.
I think 2008 taught us, right? This is the fact that we were really, I think, satisfied that we just go ahead and operate our networks and not be too concerned about them. We should be concerned about all of our infrastructure and our software, and we should test that, and we should take threat approaches to it that really question and remain vigilant on it and never become complacent.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Question over here.
I'm Carter Poppy, a reporter with American Banker. Wondering about what became of the storyboard. You mentioned that the challenge that a lot of people have with communicating the importance of cyber to people who don't understand cyber. It seems like that was a pretty influential document or convincing document. I'm wondering what became of it.
So I'll just give you one piece that, and I know Jen's going to talk about the video that's recently been put out. We called it .Millville. And we talked about, the city that was, .Millville and why .Millville was important. How do we secure .Millville, and how do we make sure that it's not just the fact that you have windows or locks on your windows, that we have, an ability to look around the house and that type of thing. So
Well, it started out as a gated community, right? It was a gated community that grew to .Millville. So it continued to grow and grow.
And it had remember the dog? You're the
You're
dog.
the dog.
You're the dog.
I don't know what we're talking about.
No, but we.
So we're going to move on to the next question.
So we actually still. I think we're trying to declassify that because we did.
We are.
We
It's a
did
great
find the
question.
cyber storyboard.
Yeah, we did find it. SL found it, and we are trying to declassify it. And we should really try and do that because it's probably wildly overclassified.
That would be my guess.
So.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Smith here with Michael Schellenberger's Public News, and as a journalist, I feel obliged to ask, particularly when we're discussing designating election integrity as critical infrastructure. As you designed CISA particularly, how did you ensure that your team went about monitoring foreign threats in such a way that didn't violate our country's democratic values?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. So we don't monitor foreign threats. It's why we work very closely with the foreign intelligence community that can help inform our understanding of threats. But since you asked that question, foreign threats to our election systems are extremely serious. We know that foreign adversaries remain intent on influencing, on interfering, and manipulating our elections, and that their activities will only be exacerbated by generative AI capabilities. We also know that there are very serious physical threats to election officials, largely stemming from unfounded claims that 2020 did not represent the will of the people. And I hope everyone here can agree that such claims are corrosive to the foundations of our democracy, and frankly, they have resulted in threats of violence to election officials and their families. But because those election officials work their asses off every single day of both parties across the country to ensure that elections are safe and secure and that every one of their citizens' votes are counted as cast, I have confidence in the integrity of our elections, and it's why the American people should have confidence in the integrity of our elections. So thanks for the question.
Could I have one?
We just have 1 minute left, so I'm going to try to get in one more question.
This is Khwaja Sheikh, a fascinating panel. Thank you for doing this. SEC fell short of requiring cybersecurity as a mandatory expertise for the corporate boardroom. Would you mind to shed your thoughts on how we need to advance the cybersecurity agenda on the corporate boardroom so that we can have leaders like Paul and Jen Easterly on the boardroom so that we can drive and set the right tone at the top to make sure we ensure a collective defense model?
I'll follow you.
Well, one of the things we talk a lot about is corporate cyber responsibility. That is, CEOs and board members recognizing that they own cyber risk as a matter of business risk and good governance. This is not something you can delegate ownership of and then fire your CISO when you have a breach. So we continually talk to CEOs and other leaders about how important that is. And I know you talk to a lot of CEOs. I think it's increasingly sinking in, given all of the
And I think the big piece is, what, as Jen said, you take ownership for that responsibility. That is something that your stockholders are expecting you to do as a senior leader. And I think that that's a really important piece. And having talked to a number of very senior folks within our business environment, I think that that message has sunk in.
So I think that was one of the original founding principles of Cyber Command in the DoD, is that whatever cyber
Commanders
was,
owned it.
commanders owned it. And before that, or they had to own it, and before that, it was ambiguous. It suddenly became imperative and clear. And leadership counts. Accountability counts.
Paul, TJ, SL, Jen, I am so thankful for you guys coming out and speaking with us today. It is hard to think of a group of 4 people in 2008 who had more to do with shaping the arc of how our nation responds to cyber threats than the 4 of you. And thank you so much for this trip down memory lane.
Thanks for doing it.